Bang! Neeves Knives. I'm Jared, and today we're going to talk about what is the best option between a gravity knife, an OTF knife, butterfly knife, or an automatic. And at the end, we're going to talk about manual knives. So first we're going to talk about the negative sides of each one. And with a gravity knife, which a butterfly knife is also a gravity knife, but in this one's cases, this is the REAT EXO, the REAT exoskeleton. Now, one of the bad things about this is it does not lock, at least in this one's case. So your hand is the lock. Next thing is it needs gravity to deploy, or you can flick your wrist and deploy it, by letting it drop and swinging your wrist out. The blade comes out and then you close it. But if it stops halfway, now you gotta release again and, flick your wrist. Now, don't get me wrong, you can get really good at it, and especially if you're not under a camera, but that's still a negative side. It does not deploy effectively every single time without a doubt, right? There is a doubt that you can misfire it, basically. And let's say in a self-defense situation, if you're on your back, right, one of the problems is now you have to make a big motion to get it out. You have to let it drop and then swing your wrist out to deploy it. So that can be a problem. You can't just deploy it on your back like this. So there are some negative things. Another thing is you have to have a sheath to carry it. You don't want to put this in your pocket. You want to make sure you carry it in a sheath in your pocket or on your belt. Now, for the balisong or butterfly knife, this you can... It's kind of mostly for show, I want to say. Now, don't get me wrong, it can be a very functional knife. But let's say in a self-defense situation, it's mostly just flashy. It looks, it can look scary, and especially with what movies and media have made these things look like. They make them look scary, so people see them and they fear them. But it's not based on any statistical data. It's all just from fear. Now, if you misfired, hit it on something, you need to swing it around a couple times in order to deploy it, or in order to, get it open and ready. So you kind of have to have room to do that. In a struggle, it's not going to be very easy. Now, for regular EDC use, just carrying to cut stuff, yeah, it's fine, but it's not going to be the best in all scenarios, right? So if you're just cutting stuff, it's not such a big deal, but it's also not, you can lock it down here, but they usually don't have the best geometry for cutting. Sometimes they do, but they're not always the best option, especially when we're talking about comfort and things like that when you're cutting. And like I said, with self-defense, it's not going to be the most reliable. An OTF, right? An OTF, you push the button, it deploys. Push the button back, it closes. Now, these usually come with a clip. Oh, by the way, this is the Benchmade Morpho 51. This is just a cheap OTF. It's not, a Microtech or anything like that. Now, if you want to get a budget OTF, I would recommend Lightning OTFs. They're like, under $40, and they're very reliable. They're good quality, and they come with usually like 440C steel at the very least. Even though it's a simple steel, it's at least a quality simple steel. Now, when you're deploying it, you push the button. Now, the button is not easy to push, which is a good thing, because if it's in your pocket, you don't want to rub up against the button and deploy it, but you won't do that. Anybody who thinks that has never carried an OTF. An OTF is, you have to put a lot of force into this button. It's pushing back the whole time, and then you have to overcome all the way up to the top and then continue pushing it. So it's not easy to deploy by accident at all. So carrying it's good. You know, it's safe in your pocket and all that good stuff. And deploying, it deploys reliably, unless if the spring breaks. Now, if the spring breaks, that's another story. Because there is springs in here that are springing it out and springing it back in. But one problem you might have, especially if we're talking about in a self-defense situation or something like that, if the blade hits anything, it will stop. Just about anything. A lot of people think you push the button and it'll just shoot through something. No, all of them, even the best quality ones, will stop. Now, you either have to grab the blade and pull it all the way out and extend it to get it back into action, or you have to swing your wrist really hard. You know, and it's pretty easy to do. I could probably do it under the camera. It's pretty easy to do. You can do that. But that's still another motion that you're going to have to do in order to get the knife deployed. So that can be a hindrance. Now, with everyday carry, cutting stuff, OTFs are not usually the best option. They're not the best cutters usually. The geometry of the blades are usually not very broad, so they're usually not the best slicers. Do they work in a pinch? Yeah, of course. But when you compare them to knives that cut very well, they're usually not the first choice of a cutting tool. They are more for self-defense and things like that. Don't get me wrong, you can pick with them and things like that, and they're still good. They're still fine. I mean, you know, carry what works for you, but they're not the best for regular use. You know, more so for self-defense, even though we see what the issue is. Now, with an automatic, these are great because, you know, they do flat out reliably. Now, the problem is closing it now. I have to push the button and I have to manually close it 2 hands. Now, if you're strong, you can do it one-handed, but there's a lot of resistance. If I let go, the blade will deploy back up. Now, if it hits something when I deploy it, I have to move my arm back and let it finish deploying, and it will. And it will. So, and if you have a cheap one and it doesn't, you can flick your wrist really quick and it should lock. You know, that's why, you know, you usually want to get reliable, good tools. But Protex, this is the Protec TR3, are very reliable. They have a nice strong spring. When you deploy them with the button, they snap out really hard. But like I said, one of the problems is because they snap out really hard, the spring's really strong on the closing position. So, this, I think, in my opinion, would be the best bet out of the bunch for self-defense, tactical uses, cutting things up, slicing, things like that. They come with different blade grinds, shapes, etc. So they're going to be the best cutting tool for regular purposes and uses, and have the least amount of negatives to self-defense situations. Now, when we move along to a manual knife, so this is my most recommended out of those, but my most recommended overall is actually a manual knife. Now, as far as manual knives go, one, they don't have as many setbacks as automatics and spring-loaded knives. These use what's called like a detent. So when the blade's closed, it has a resistance holding it shut. So you overcome the resistance with the flipper tab or whatever the deployment option is, and it shoots out. And this shoots out just as fast as an automatic. So as fast as this thing can open, I can open this. The difference is I don't have to use 2 hands to close it and overcome this spring that's trying to push the blade out. I can easily, like in this case, this is the CIVIVI Conspirator button lock. I could easily just push the button and let it close. Now, even with other knives, I can do that too. I'll show you guys in a second. But this being a flipper, or it has a fuller for the reverse flick or thumb flick, I can also use the button. So it has lots of ways of deploying it and nothing stopping me from closing it. So for regular cutting use, if I'm using this hand holding the object I'm going to cut, I don't have to set it down to put my knife away. I can easily make my cut, put my knife away, get it back in action, cut again. It makes it a lot easier for regular purpose. Now for self-defense, I still prefer the manual knife. So out of the other knives, I prefer the regular automatic. Out of all knives, I prefer manual locking folders. And manual locking folders, there's so many different locking options. Like here is a Hinder XM18 skinny with a sheep's foot blade. This is a frame lock. And I can easily deploy it really fast and close it really fast, one-handed, very reliably. Multiple deployments. Not all knives have multiple deployments, but this one does. So I can very quickly deploy the knife, use it, get it closed back up. Now, let's say my blade gets caught, like say self-defense. If it doesn't deploy all the way, a little flick of the wrist and it's deployed. So it's very similar to the automatic. The one thing is the automatic, you just have to back your hand up, especially if you have a strong spring, to get it to continue the deployment. But with a manual knife, it's kind of the same thing. Like, it's such a quick motion, and I prefer a manual. Plus, I don't have to worry about springs breaking. Now, there are some knives that use springs that are not automatics, like, say, Axis locks. Axis locks do use Omega springs for their locking system, not their deployment. But with manual knives, there are so many different options. I mean, there are tons of different button locks. This is the button lock Elementum. And the way this one works is you have to push the button. It's locked when it's closed. Push the button, let it swing, and then when it swings open, you let go of the button and it's locked open. With the close, you just you push the button, let it drop, it locks when it's closed. So you can swing it in and out, very easy to use. This is another button lock. I'll link everything I can down in the description if you want more information. But you just easily flip it, it deploys, push the button, and you can close it. It doesn't have multiple deployments, but I can technically flick this one or just push the button. So I guess with the pushing the button, it does have multiple deployments. So I can push it and swing it out. With any button lock, you can do that. You can push the button, swing it, lock it open. Now, there's lots of other kinds of manual locking folders. I mean, there's axis locks, compression locks, liner locks, frame locks, triad locks, shark locks. There's just endless amounts of different locks, which also gives you different variations. There's so many different options between different blade shapes, grinds, just everything. So I prefer, when we're talking about a regular everyday carry knife, I prefer a manual knife because I have so many options, so many different locks, so many different lock strengths, because there are some incredible strong locks out there. Now, I also prefer it for even self-defense, and I do it because, one, I have so many different options between locks and deployment options and all of that. Plus, it's something that I have full control over. So if I do misfire it, I can easily manually lock it open. I know the lock's really strong. There's a sense of control with it that I really, really like. And I prefer it. I think there's less options for something to go wrong. But another big reason is because it works so good for regular use. It is usually, in a lot of cases, don't get me wrong, they make a lot of automatics with good blade grinds, blade shapes, etc. So I'm not saying they don't. They do. They have a ton of them. But there are so many options for manual knives. And in many cases, you can carry them in a lot more places. But aside from that, I believe that since it's so much better for me personally for regular use, especially since I can close it so easy, it's so much easier to close, and it's actually satisfying to close, that 99% of the time, 99.999% of the time, I'm using my knife as a cutting tool. You know, breaking down cardboard, cutting rope, cutting straps, doing whatever I'm doing with my knife as a tool. And if that thing happens where I have to use my knife in a last case scenario with my knife, I feel very comfortable with that. And 99% of the time, it's the better option for me for a tool. So I prefer it as a tool. So I will carry, in my opinion, I'd prefer the manual knife over the other ones. And just so you guys know, I'm going to try to link everything I can down in the description. Some of this stuff is not available at the moment. Some of them do come back in stock often, but I will link what I can down in the description for you guys. I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.